like to call to order special meeting of the City of Alameda's Public Utilities Board that will discuss the Alameda Municipal Power Strategic Plan tonight. Meeting will start at 6:01 p.m. Roll call, please.
President Clemente.
Here.
Commissioner McKenna. Here. Commissioner Giantini. Here. Commissioner Hunter. City Manager Ott. Here.
All right, thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is oral communications for non-agendized items. Members of the public are invited to address the board on any item not appearing on the agenda. If you so choose, you will have an opportunity to address the board at the end of each item during our presentation. So you can, if you want to make a comment now, that's great. If you want to wait and do it during your presentation, that's fine. After the presentations are made, we'll allow the public to make some comments, participate if it's a workshop. So I'd like to hear what you have to say, and then we'll open it up for the board to make comments. Okay, with that, we'll move on. The next items on our agenda, we have our items 3 is special presentations. Item 4 is consent calendar. We have neither one of those tonight. To move on to item 5, the agenda is items. Workshop, annual strategic planning workshop.
Thank you, President Cerventi, members of the board. So before we get into the key performance indicators, we have several speakers lined up, and we'll start. I think we'll just dive right in there. We'll start with a presentation on the City of Alameda development forecast, and we are fortunate to have Andrew Thomas, City of Alameda Planning, Building and Transportation Director, and we locked him in because at this time next year he will not be available because he will be retired. So
that's a key. Thank you, Nico. Is this where I should stand?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, Nico. Andrew Thomas, Planning, Building and Transportation Director. Worked for the city now for almost 20 years. So, but this is the first time I've ever been to a utilities board meeting.
Welcome.
I set this this little presentation up. So if you decide you want these on an annual basis to sort of check in on projections, at least from our department, it'll be easy for our department to sort of update them on an annual basis if that's something you'd like to do. So just a few slides. Thinking about where is growth going to happen and what kind of growth is going to happen as we look into the future. Obviously, it's a projection. It's highly dependent on the economy and economic conditions. But we think of it really in 2 categories. There's housing growth and there's commercial institutional growth. And we really think about it in 2 categories. Alameda, primarily a residential island. So the big growth continually is happening in housing. And this isn't set up as an 8-year projection because we just finished our housing element for the state of California, which is an 8-year plan for housing. So do I do the slides with this? So our housing element, which was just adopted by the city council and certified by the state of California as an 8-year plan for housing, and we have to show where we can provide up to 1,535 units over the next 8 years. Now, the city doesn't build housing, so it's completely dependent on financial markets, private home builders, and nonprofits. So what we have is we have land set aside and zoned to allow this to happen. Just big picture over 8 years, about 24, we project about 24% of that housing growth, if it all happens at Alameda Point. About 15% on other vacant former federal lands. So you can see that's North Housing, Habitat for Humanity. Those are both over by Stargell, Singleton, old Coast Guard housing. Carmel, they have a project out there. And then, of course, the McKay Wellness Center, which is down off of McKay Avenue down at the foot of Webster Street. Then another 24% along the northern waterfront. So those are a number of large projects that have already been approved. External terminals, boat works, Alameda Marina. Some of these projects are actually under construction. We're also planning for about 19%, that's shopping centers. Shopping centers that have expressed the most interest and seem to be furthest along on thinking about housing in the next 8 years are South Shore Shopping Center and Harbor Bay Shopping Center. Probably less likely that anything will happen at the other shopping centers. And then Park and Webster Street is really is an area where we try to encourage housing above commercial, but it's very little capacity there, about 8%. This diagram and this graphic is from the housing element. The next slide, if you can't see that, this is table E2 from the 8-year housing projection. So if anybody ever wants to know what's happening in Alameda or what our forecast for housing is for the next 8 years, it's in this table, in the housing element, Appendix E, which is the housing capacity. There's tons of information about every single site. You can't read this table, but really what you can imagine, the top 9 lines, about half of it, those are approved projects. So those are projects where they already have their approvals, their land use entitlements. They could be coming forward in the next year or 2 or 3. Some are big, like Alameda Point, that 24%, that's all fully entitled. So that'll be happening in increments over the full 8-year period. But and then the housing element, that appendix, has a description and information about every single one of these line items. But those numbers I ran through on the previous slide, about 24%, 8%, this is the next level of detail. The second half of the table are the sites where the zoning has been changed to encourage housing, but we don't have actual applications yet. There's not an approved project yet. So the South Shore Shopping Center is in that category. Some of the sites on Park Street and Webster Street. But to make this table, we had contact with the property owners of every single site. So we do know the property owners on the second half of the site are interested in doing housing on their property over the next 8 years. Commercial, way much more difficult to kind of project. Obviously, very sort of market driven, and just a lot less of it, frankly, than housing in Alameda. Where's it going to happen? We believe that commercial growth, non-residential growth, is going to happen in sort of 3 big areas. Number one, Alameda Point. That's going to probably be over the next 8 years. I think you'll see more new companies coming into the historic district using hangars. There's still some buildings out there. So those are new businesses coming to Alameda, moving into buildings that have been vacant in many cases, creating additional demand or need for power. Maybe over the next 8 years, we're planning and doing some work on a performing arts center. That'll be a new building. There's also interest of the food bank to build a new building. But, one new building every few years, maybe, depending on market conditions. It's really hard to project. As you know from being out there, I mean, it's been 20 years. We haven't built a lot of new buildings. It's a slow process. The other 2 big growth areas are Harbor Bay Business Park. Still a fair amount of vacant land out there. Up to a few years ago, things were really booming. I mean, a lot of people were coming, existing businesses who were talking about expanding, major campus expansions, as well as new businesses looking at some of the remaining vacant land at the Harbor Bay Business Park, all around the life science kind of industry, that sector. Those conversations have really slowed down with current interest rates and just uncertainty in the market. But over the next 8 years, I think you will see it. Probably a couple new buildings going in out there. And also the conversion of existing buildings to life science. Marina Village Business Park, a lot of that's been going on as well. Almost entirely taking those small 1-story buildings that were office buildings. Historically, they're moving their office tenants into the big office buildings, which had a lot of vacancies. And then life science companies are taking over the 1-story buildings, gutting them and turning them into lab space as they can be converted. There is one remaining pad out there. It's right at the new intersection of the Clement Extension, Sherman, that sort of 3-way new intersection right there. Just on the north side of that, there's that big, gigantic parking lot. That is a development pad. And they do have plans to build a building on that for, again, life science. They were going They were pushing real hard about a year ago. They've slowed it down just because the market's a little bit unstable right now. Park Street and Web Street, frankly, we just don't see a lot of growth. I mean, there'll be new businesses coming and going. There is a approval for a new Park Street hotel on Good Toyota site. It's the scooter, you know, where they sell scooters out of that building now. But not a lot of change on Park Street and Web Street. I think Park and Web Street will be pretty sort of consistent. And that's all I got. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. And I think, like I said at the beginning, this is kind of thing that the planning and building department, we have a pretty good idea of what's kind of coming in the, you know, down the chute. So we are always happy to sort of, and we have over the years, obviously, we've communicated staff to staff. I mean, the AMP staff comes by every year, like, all right, tell us what's happening, what's coming. We try to do our best to keep them up to speed.
So thank you, Andrew. And President Sorrenti, if I can suggest a format.
Sure.
So we do have several speakers that have actually come long distances from Roseville and Sacramento, although Andrew lives very close by. But I think it would be ideal if maybe we had, you know, this is subject to board approval, but for each speaker, if we had questions, we could ask those questions, and then we could release people to go as opposed to speaking up.
Sure.
To it. That's okay with the board.
Yeah. So do the public have any comments? No comments from the public. Any questions from the board? Andrew, you made a mention of a hotel. What's the likelihood of that?
I just ran into the operator just 2 days ago. He said he was still working on it. He is still smiling. He was still. The planning board just gave him an extension. It had been approved just before COVID. COVID hit. Of course, the hospitality industry just went completely flat. He came out of COVID, immediately came to the planning board and said, "Hey, I need another 2 years." We went, you know, because these permits, they expire if you don't build a project in 2 years. So he's still working on it. You know, the hospitality industry is one of the slowest industries to recover in the Bay Area from COVID, but he's still working on it. He's still staying optimistic. When he submits building permits, then you know it's really happening, and he has not submitted.
Has there been any interest of anything out at the point as far as commercial?
Well, not retail commercial, but you know, we have the food bank.
Right.
And they really want to build a brand new building, and it's really sort of set up almost like a grocery store.
Right.
Come in, look at things on shelves, people come and go. There has been some interest to see if we can do something around Site A, you know, right at the intersection of Main. But you know, it's all the sort of more traditional commercial retail folks are like, yeah, someday, not yet. More people. We need more people out there. As you get more people, we're going to be interested in coming out to Elm Point.
We haven't heard anything with respect to businesses or not light industrial or anything else out of the point.
Oh, I mean, we have constant interest. Jennifer, do you want to help me answer some of these questions? Jennifer here knows everything I do about how.
No, just because there are a lot of interest in the building. Right? We're talking about new construction. That's a lot harder. But buildings, there's a lot of interest. So we're actively negotiating with some commercial businesses for some of those big hangars.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's probably for the, you know, good almost 300,000 square feet of commercial. And those tend to be tech manufacturing or biotech manufacturing. And then we're actively marketing a couple of buildings for food and beverage manufacturing that are vacant. We're going to start that soon. So there's a lot of, it's just that it's easier to finance, you know, moving into an already existing building, right? So I do think there's a lot of commercial interest in the buildings. It's just not yet in new construction.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Andrew, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come down and give us an update. And actually,
first on the agenda.
We would look forward to having it done every year.
Yeah, no, I'll let staff know, Alan, Ty, and the other planners, you know, we do these kinds of presentations all the time, so.
Yeah, so as we get into it, you know, what you presented tonight, and then kind of along the line of the questions I asked, you know, kind of what could we see, you know, because it helps us on the board have an idea of, are we going to see a lot of construction elements that we're going to have to figure out how to fund from the electrical side, so that'll have a big impact on how much power we're going to need, that kind of thing. So it's very beneficial to us.
And I just think the other factor that I didn't address at all is, you know, the sort of, we obviously have our, you know, we're encouraging now all new buildings be electric powered, not gas powered. And then, you know, one of the interesting issues, I'm sure they come and talk to Ruckus about it, is, you know, WIA and their plans to, I mean, they're going to need to move all of their boats to electric in the coming years. So what existing land uses are going to be not new, they're just existing, but they're changing their operations. They're moving towards more electric power. I mean, gas leaf blowers, we banned those. So every leaf blower in the future is going to be electric. I don't know if that it's even a blip on your forecast, but those kinds of little things, it might add up over time to increase the need for. That's the direction we're going. We're trying to push it that way for greenhouse gas reasons.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, we'll continue moving along. So next we have a presentation on the Northern California Power Agency and future generation options. And our guest speaker is Monty Hanks. He's the Chief Financial Officer, Assistant General Manager for Finance and Administrative Services, and will walk us through the presentation this evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Nico, for having me, and Mr. Chair and members of the board. When Nico asked me to come present today, he wanted me to focus on the projects that the electric utility is in. And just like he said, talk about some of the things we're doing, some of the challenges that these projects are facing. They're big dollars that could potentially impact all the owners within the project, as well as maybe some opportunities, as you heard, trying to achieve state and federal climate goals. How do we try to transition into a cleaner fleet of generation? And so with that, I guess I'll go ahead and move us along. Oh gosh, this is tough to see, and I apologize. You just never know how this is going to be. So the first thing that you see here, these are the 4 projects that the AMP is invested in through NCPA. You have hydro up at the top, geothermal, CT1, these are combustion turbines, and CT2, which we call the STIG. And then the next column is your ownership percentage. So in hydro, you have about a 10% ownership. Geo is about 16.8, about a 22% in CT1, and 19% in the CT2. The next column is the generation that we achieved in fiscal 22, and your percentage of that. That's your percentage of the generation. The third column is fiscal 23. We're about 3/4 of the way through. And then down below, the table at the bottom shows what in fiscal 22 your gross load was about 338,000 megawatt hours. And the units that you're invested in through NCPA covered about 170,000 megawatt hours. And if you do the math, it's about a 50% is that these units are sort of hedging and helping you with your load resource balances. The balance of that, I'll let Nico explain where it comes from. I'm going to guess some of it's coming from WAPA, as well as some PPAs, contracts, and probably market purchases to round out the balance to get to about 100%. Oh gosh, okay, well, I apologize. This is very difficult to see. And this is really a high-level summary of the hydro project located in Murphys, California. If you've never been there, I highly recommend you go tour it and visit it. It's some of the most beautiful areas of our fleets that you'll see. Really what drives us, there's, for the most part, our hydroelectric is, load following. What does that mean? And so if you click a light on, you got to have power. And these units are so flexible that they can ramp up and respond immediately in real time to that demand. It also functions as a base load. Sometimes if there is a need for it, it can be running 24/7 to help support the grid. What helps here is that this hydro unit, there's two big units. These are 126.5 megawatt units, which we call the Collierville Powerhouse, followed by the smaller unit. Oh, and the Collierville Powerhouse, these provide what we consider zero carbon energy credit. It's large hydro, is not unfortunately renewable REC credit, but the smaller ones are. And we have a 6 megawatt unit up there at Spicer, so you get that renewable energy credit. You'll notice, if you can even see it, one of the lines is 40 miles of these transmission lines. That is a very small number compared to PG&E, but still a rather large number for us. The transmission, we have to get insurance, and the liability insurance is what is been the challenge. Really stemming from some of the investor-owned utilities who really hardened that market. It's very challenging. We used to get about 85 million of liability coverage. That's dropped to about 35 million at 3 times the price. And so, but luckily we do have an insurer who continues to provide it to us. One other thing to note, the FERC license here runs out in 2032. So we've actually started now some of those preliminary discussions with the Calaveras County Water District, who owns the rights to the water. And so we're negotiating again to see if we can relicense the project and continue to own and operate it. One of the things I want to mention here is recent events. Because we own a lot of the reservoirs, lakes, they have these dams that, with the Division of Safety of Dams, they require us to do a lot of maintenance on here. At the Collierville, they have transformer maintenance. These are transformers that are like 30 years old, so they have constant maintenance that needs to be done. And then lastly, to help us mitigate the cost of liability insurance, this group does quite a bit of wildfire mitigation, meaning those 40 lines, they're walking those lines each year, identifying what brush needs to be cleared from out from under those transmission lines to really help mitigate any potential risk that may occur. Some upcoming events. This is what this picture shows. It's tough to see. This is the Collierville. There's a stream, I guess if you call it, that runs. There's been so much water up there, as you know. We've had constant rain, that this created this sort of break here where there's going to be some stormwater mitigation that's going to be done over the next couple of years. That's going to drive a very large project. But at the same time, there's going to be a reduction in debt service. This back in '85 is when they issued the debt. We have about approximately 8 years to go. And one of the great things here is that, I know you can't see the numbers, but it's approximately next year a $17 to $18 million decline in the cost of the debt, and it runs out to 2032. But that McKay's reservoir, which is one of our it's one of our reservoirs in our watershed, over time, with the amount of rain and snow, you have sediment that comes down off the hill and it starts to fill the reservoir, and it creates inefficiencies with running it. You have to dredge it and clear it out. And one of the biggest challenges that the U.S. Forest Service is giving us is that they want us to truck it out in a way to some, land away from this facility, and that drives significant costs of the project. A bunch of us were back in DC. This was one of the things that we were lobbying for with the regulatory agencies, is how can we get something within the Farm Bill that would allow us to get a permit with the United States Forest Service and put it on adjacent land, and then that significantly will reduce the cost. And so there was a huge effort from a lot of us. When this McKay's was built, we took that dirt and literally put it on the adjacent lands. And so we're trying to make that argument. They can use this for for the fire breaks. Maybe there's roads they can use. We see opportunities for them. We just have to try to get it done. And then lastly, this relicensing is, if anyone has ever done this before, it's a very long process and it's god awful expensive. That was another topic that we had back in DC, was to try to help reform the relicensing process. And here's a picture of McKay's. I forgot I had this. Again, it's a beautiful sight to see, but over time, that sediment does come down off the hill and starts to fill that reservoir, and we have to dig it out. And then wanted to put here is, and I know it's tough to see on these charts here, but over these next couple of years, even though we have a decline in debt service, we're forecasting some significant uplift to cover the cost of that McKay's, which right now I think we're estimating about $66 million to dredge that reservoir. And a large sum of that is trucking out the dirt. That's our initial estimate. We're going to continue to hone in on it, but it's a project that we have to do. We've delayed it quite some time to try to minimize the impact onto the project owners. And so we've sort of timed it that as the debt goes to fall off, we're going to fill that gap with some large contributions to go and attack this project that has to get done. And you'll see on there too, there's going to be some FERC relicensing costs that we're estimating. Again, this is probably going to be about a 7-year, 8-year process, probably to the tune of $50–60 million for FERC relicensing. So it's not cheap, but if we can continue to knock on, DC's door to try to help reform relicensing, that not only benefits everybody here. Next thing I want to talk about is our geothermal project. This is up in Middletown. They call it the geysers. If you've never been here, we have tours here all the time. Some of the most fascinating engineering that I've ever seen. When you start climbing that mountain, you'll see pipes, and they're huge. And and then once you learn a little bit more, they're basically drilling about 1.5 miles into the Earth's surface, where there's these geysers that we're pulling up steam that's so hot that it spins the turbine and creates renewable energy. And so it's a fantastic project. There's 2 plants up there. Plant 1 has 2 units, both producing about 55 megawatts. Plant 2 has 1 unit producing about 40 megawatts. There's production wells, 100 miles of underground pipe. And then what was so creative in the 90s is when you're draining the reservoir, you start to have what's called degradation. And the engineers in the 90s were able to work with Lake County, because Lake County had their affluent wastewater and they needed a place to put it. And these engineers devised a way to truck that, I shouldn't say truck it, they pump it from Lake County, and we re-inject the steam field. And so we've essentially almost brought the decline of the steam field to a crawl. And what that's done is it's enabled us to keep this project going probably another 25 years. And so it's a fascinating thing. The debt, as you can tell, is almost paid off. I think that's in 2024. We're almost there, so this is going to be free and clear. Now, one of the things when I created this presentation, I certainly don't mean to insult the intelligence of the folks on the board. I just wasn't sure who was going to be in the audience. And it's, let me get to it just real quick. So here's a few of the benefits here is dependability is huge. 95% availability in 22, which is great. It really helps secure any sort of against any volatility within the market. And as I mentioned, these reservoir declines are less than 2% a year. Recent events, I only listed 2 here. I could probably multiply this by 5 because they are constantly doing work up there. Wildfire mitigation is another big effort. They usually coordinate with the CAL FIRE's Conoctide crew, and they do a lot of clearing of the vegetation up there. And then they had a Plant 1 fire system modernization. Those were big ticket items. Future challenges, as I mentioned, it's an older facility and it's in a highly corrosive environment. And so it requires quite a bit of maintenance activities, lots of projects in order to keep this unit in its good working condition. Opportunities, we have 2 lines that are coming out of there. We call it the Lakeville and Fulton line. PG&E sometimes will take those down and it takes a unit out. And so one of the things, projects we have in 24 is to build a permanent intertie switch. So if PG&E takes down Lakeville, we can just flip the switch and keep the power going down the Fulton line and vice versa. So it's creating this sort of business resiliency, being able to keep that unit running without impacting the owners of the project. And then the last thing I put there is this battery energy storage new project that we're analyzing. And this is where I meant to go with my audience is you've all heard of the duck curve. I'm hoping this is a picture of it. So as time has gone on, there's been so much solar and renewables added into California's grid that during the middle of the day, as soon as the sun comes up, you start seeing that we really have this overproduction of energy that's occurring. But when the sun goes down, the solar goes to sleep, and then you see these large ramps because most of us are coming home from work, we're turning on the AC, and there's huge demand for the power, and the solar that's driving it during the day is turned off because there is no sun. And so what you start creating here in the Cal ISO market is what they call curtailments. And what I mean by that is this is just Monday. This black line is the real-time price that occurred on Monday. And as you notice, it starts, at midnight at around $30 a megawatt hour. And then as soon as the sun comes up, what's the price? It's negative because the Cal ISO is trying to get you to turn your unit off because there's too much in the system. So this battery project that we're looking at is going to use this timing here as what I call it an arbitrage play. So as soon as solar comes up and those prices get curtailed and they're next to zero, we want to take this and direct it towards the battery and charge the unit. And then charge it. It takes about 7 hours to charge it. And then right when the sun starts to go down, we're going to redirect our geothermal to then start producing back out onto the grid. And so what that's going to do is we looked at this. This was what we're calling our GeoBest project. It's the largest size we could get out based on the land is a 70 megawatt battery storage. And like I mentioned, this takes about 7 hours to charge, and you discharge it in the middle of the night when prices are high. So it's that arbitrage. Charge it when it's low, it doesn't cost you anything. Dispatch it at night when the prices are higher. And it just helps with your RPS goals. And this is such an opportunity we're looking at. And within our administration's Inflation Reduction Act, there's tax credits that are available now to public agencies. These used to be tax credits only available to developers. They've written the language in there now that gives public agencies the ability to tap into these tax credits. If you issue taxable bonds, it's a 30% tax credit. If you issue tax exempt bonds, there is a small haircut of about 15%. And so when we start looking at the numbers, the cost to build this was about $152 million, offset with I call it the free money from the federal government. And so it takes this project to about $100 million. And when we start looking at the net present value with the ITCs, it shows that it has a positive internal rate of return on a 25-year project. Like I mentioned earlier, our Geo project's going to go for another 25 years. So this combination of adding this battery storage to our geothermal facility really creates this win-win situation. When we issued an RFP, battery storage project came back at about $15 this kilowatt hour. This project comes in at about $6. So it's really a net savings of about $9-10 by building this. Now it's something we're still evaluating right now. We're talking in our committees about it, but we could see something like this come to complement the geothermal facility. CT1, these are peakers. They're not the most popular thing. We have two here in Alameda, one in Lodi. These are those Frame 5 engines. They're really designed to support the grid in the middle of the night when there's high demand for power. These are summer peakers, but they run on natural gas, and they're not part of really the overall goal of our climate goals. The Alameda is a 22% owner in this project. Some of the benefits, again, for you, it's behind the meter, so you get to avoid the TAC. They call that the transmission access charge. That's a huge charge on a lot of our bills today. And you also get the member protection from the market volatility. You have this from a resource adequacy standpoint. You, by Cal ISO tariff, have to have resource adequacy, and you claim this unit towards that. And then, like I mentioned, the Cal ISO, is huge peak hour demand. When they call this unit to the market, they're recovering the cost on it to run it. Now, there are challenges. It doesn't run often, but when it gets called frequently to the market, it does start increasing the sort of maintenance that has to be done to keep these units in good conditions. And of course, one of the opportunities here is with these new technologies coming out, there's the ability to upgrade this engine and possibly burn hydrogen down the road, making it a greenhouse gas emission free. CT2, very similar. It's another peaker, except this unit is very inefficient and it's old and it's an end of life. And so this one here is located right next to the Lodi Energy Center. It's a 25 megawatt unit. But the manufacturer of this no longer supports it. So when things break, it's going to be impossible to fix. So it's about 35,000 hours on this engine. The next interval is 50,000. That's when the unit has to be decommissioned. We were planning on doing that when the debt's paid off in 2024. But we do see that there's value because it is connected through PG&E's. This interconnection agreement has tremendous value. So one of the things we're looking at, here's just some history. I've already mentioned a lot of this, commissioned in 95, and it's ready to go at any moment. And so we've been looking at how can we repurpose this. So the first thing we're looking at really is to upgrade this engine, rip it out, and possibly put in a engine that burns hydrogen. So sort of these next steps is there's 4 owners in this project. You're one of them. Is NCPA has to approach the 4 owners and decide, do you want to participate in a sort of phase 2 new project that looks at replacing this engine? If this is not an a flavor that this city wants to do with this type of generation fleet, we do have other members who will more than I think be happy to take your share if that is the case. But this is something we're working on. We put it in our 24 budget to study it. So there is more to come on this project. Getting close to the end. So this LEC hydrogen project. So one of the things, and again, I'm sorry that this is tough to see. You've heard of peak week. I'm not sure how much communication occurred. So back in September of last year, this is when we hit the peak on the grid, when the governor sent out the Amber Alert saying, unplug everything you got. And it worked. But the one thing I want to point out is when we hit 52,000 megawatts, look at that bottom bar. It says how much of that was on natural gas. 49%, it's 25,000 megawatts. Then you have another 13% coming in of imports, which is probably coal and natural gas. So my point here is that there's still a huge dependency on natural gas plants to help support California's grid. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is how can we convert. At some point, these units are going to have to go because our climate goals say by 2045, these plants can't exist. So somehow we have to be able to either convert them to hydrogen or find other replacement products that are going to help us get through the middle of the night. Batteries last about 4 hours. So there's either going to be a ton of batteries or maybe hydrogen to replace a lot of these CT units. So LEC hydrogen, this is located in Lodi. You guys are not an owner in this, but I call it the domino effect that could occur down the road. So back in, this unit was built in 2012. In 2018, we upgraded the engine. We had a catastrophic failure, but we upgraded the engine, the $45 million engine that can burn hydrogen. It can burn 45% today. And Siemens is the manufacturer on it. And they said by 2028, this unit can burn 100% hydrogen. And so next to Lodi, it's what we call a shovel-ready project. Again, another thing that we highlighted back in DC, and it's tough to see, but this is right there in Lodi, adjacent to their wastewater facility. So they have water available to build what we call a hydrogen project. It's an electrolyzer. So you feed it water and it splits the atoms. So H2O, it splits it to hydrogen and oxygen. And for the ability to create hydrogen that then would be fed into this machine and either burn it. Portions of it can be used for the transportation sector because I-5 hub there. This is going to be a big deal to try to help convert the big fleets to hydrogen. The other thing, the Port of Oakland is looking at upgrading a lot of their trucks and then their shipping fleet to hydrogen. They're seeing a demand for it. And then on top of it, which I was unaware of until I heard from Jerry, that the ferries that are used here in Alameda are going to have to at some point be converted to hydrogen. This could be an opportunity that we generate enough hydrogen to where we can spread it. I call it the domino effect down the road where it might be a beneficial use. I just wanted to share it today. This is something we've submitted an application to the Department of Energy, trying to see if we can get some of those funds that they've allocated towards hydrogen projects. If it does get picked up, I think it's like a $35 million grant, and then the state's going to add in another 15 million to try to help this work. Here's the conceptual drawing of the electrolyzer, and it's too hard to read any of this stuff on there, but then some other visuals. These are the trucks coming in, you know, to fill up the tanks and to travel them, you know, out to their destination. So again, it's a nice opportunity down the road that could impact Alameda at some point in the future. So I think that's all I have. I probably went over time, but lots to say. Sorry.
Monty, thank you very much. And don't worry about it. You didn't go over time.
Okay.
I think you misquoted me just a smidgen on the hydrogen when we were back, which is on the ferries, and that's fine. When we're back in DC, when we met with the Department of Energy last week, they said that they're actually doing they just funded a hydrogen test ferry in San Francisco. And so our comments when we were meeting with some of the agencies were San Francisco Bay Ferry is stationed here in Alameda, so it will either be hydrogen or electric. So either way, we'll have an impact. It'll impact us. And so that's kind of where we're going for it. It'll obviously be up to the Bay Ferry to decide how they do it. But we know that we're really excited that the Department of Energy is funding that test ferry right now.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So we'd like to open it up to the public, as this is a workshop. If you have any questions or comments, okay, then we'll open it back to the board. Oh, by the way, do we have anybody online?
One person by phone.
Okay.
If you are interested in speaking, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
That is Alan Harbottle.
Oh, okay. Then that
We don't want to hear from you.
Don't offer him.
Members of the board, any questions for Monty? Yeah, that was really good. I appreciate you coming down and talking to us. There is a lot of work to be done. As we would look to see if we get the CTs changed out.
Sure. That's
important to us. And that's why I've been actually making a big push back in DC to get the electrolyzers going and everything. And NCPA is part of the state's application to be part of a hydrogen hub applicant for the whole nation. There's funding under the IIJA Act that was passed a year ago. And there's 6 across the country for $8 million, something like that. And the state of California put in one application. And this is the Northern California piece of the state's hydrogen hub. So kind of keeping their fingers crossed that it can get going. I'm excited about it because if this works, we can get the hydrogen source up and running. And then it gives us an opportunity then to look at the CTs out here and flip those. If we flip those, then it gives us a true source of green power that's behind the meter. And then we could start maybe looking at it as a way of not necessarily running as a peaker plant, but something else. And the hydrogen, needs to get here, is to be transported here. And we can then work with the Port of Oakland because they are in the process working with their shippers. Some of the shippers want to create a green corridor from Asia to California, running on hydrogen, ethanol fuels, and come into the port, and they want to be able to operate that way when they get here. So the Port of Oakland is starting to look at that also. So it seems like there's some great synergy looking. It's going to take a few years, but at least it's headed in the right direction, and potential for federal funding is out there. So working with NCPA, I think we have some opportunity. Sure.
Very good. So I want to thank Monty also for coming down and making the presentation. Also acknowledge President Cerventi, who is also the chair of NCPA. And this is the one time in the year where you get a good look at what's happening at NCPA. And so I think hear a lot about things that are happening in our city, and there's a lot of work going on as an electric utility, but then there's a lot going on in NCPA, and NCPA, it's a great partnership, and we work closely with them to manage these assets and also to forward looking. A lot of this is in Chris's group, and in particular, Alan Harbottle is the lead on those. And so you see in the list of bills paid, you see the all resources bill every month. Well, all of this feeds into that, and that's Monty's bill right there. So there's lots of conversations with Monty about what we're paying and so on. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that and frame that, and also to acknowledge President Cervenci, because essentially he's doing double duty.
Thank you. You did forget to say that the hydro is running full bore right
It is
now.
right now.
Yeah.
It's luckily that reservoir, it's tough to, on that one chart, we've been in a dry year for a few years now, and it's so nice to know that, and being in a unit like that, if you recall, we had those outrageous gas prices that popped in December, and being in these units allowed us to, we had a scheduled outage for LEC, and then we weren't going to run hydro because we were just going to save the water. But because there was so much water in the system, last thing you want to do is spill it over the dam, because then there goes all your money out the door. And you're able at that point to shift gears to hedge against any sort of volatility that's in the market. So LEC ran, and the hydro was pumped up, and we were pretty much running, except when it hits those prices, it's load following. So we shut it off about 9 o'clock, 3, 4, 5, we ramp it back up to max load. And having that flexibility and being able to model it to maximize its opportunities, it's such a great unit to have in your fleet.
Sure.
If I could add also just real quickly, and Monty, thank you very much for the presentation, but also thank you to NCPA also for the partnership that we have, because you guys open a lot of doors, and then we can go in and talk to people in Washington. And honestly, sometimes it's a geography lesson. But here's Lodi, here's the Port of Oakland, who are our neighbors right across the water. I said to a number of people, I'm not worried about wrecking my shoulder. I can pick up a rock and almost throw it across. And they're like, oh. And so there's a lot of synergies. And so the whole idea with hydrogen and how we could use it as well. And there's a big push towards trying to clean up that 1 mile around every port in California, and how important that is for all of the citizens who live around there and whatnot, trying to continue to hammer home. And you can see that finally the message was starting to get through to people, but it is constant. But I appreciate the fact that you guys also went back and gave up your time, and that you kind of opened those doors so that we can get in and have these audiences that we so desperately need to represent the city of Alameda.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so last but not least, we have a couple of speakers from the California Municipal Utilities Association, and I don't know you're first, okay? So we're gonna kick it off with Patrick Welch, who's the Senior Director of Energy Policy and Strategy, and then after that, Barry Moline, who's the Executive Director of CMUA, will close things out for us. So I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Nico. Mr. President, board, good to be here. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you inviting myself and Barry to be here to present to you. Again, I'm Patrick Welch with the California Municipal Utilities Association. I'm going to cover about 10 minutes briefly, basically what's going on in Sacramento. Talk a little bit about what happened last year in Sacramento. To give you the end of the story, it was a really big year last year. I think that's really important when you're thinking about key performance index or key performance indicators and what you're considering for your strategic plan. What's going on this year in the legislature, and also some important regulatory issues that are happening too. So real quick, California Municipal Utilities Association, our vision is to create a better California through community-owned water, wastewater, and power. We are a resource in Sacramento for public power utilities as well as public water agencies. We advocate on behalf of public power for the legislature and in front of every regulatory agency, including California Energy Commission, Air Resources Board, Water Board, and the California Public Utilities Commission as well. Last year, just to give you a sense of what's going on in Sacramento, we worked on 120 energy bills, 80 water bills, and about 30 different regulatory proceedings. So there's a highly active regulatory and legislative apparatus in Sacramento, as I'm sure you know well. We have a small and mighty team of 8 plus some outside consultants that help us with our advocacy. And work really closely with the team at NCPA to coordinate our legislative and regulatory advocacy as well. Last year, the state had a big budget surplus, about $95 billion. This year, they're back down to about a $30 billion deficit. Interesting swing. As part of that, it provided an opportunity for public power to secure additional funding for arrearages for the COVID. So overall, we've been able to secure over $500 million for public power customers statewide to help pay down bills. Most of that money has actually gone out the door and been applied to customer accounts as well. So that was a really big lift for all public power, but I think it ended up helping a lot of different people around the state. A lot of clean energy and climate change legislation passed last year. There's a new law that provides what I call stepping stones onto the way to the state's ultimate 100% clean energy target by 2045. The state law now says 90% renewable and zero carbon by 2035, 95% by 2040. I don't know how many state agency offices or buildings you have here in the city of Alameda, but there is a requirement for state agencies to actually have an earlier compliance for their own energy needs. We were able to secure language in that legislation that allows you to help those state agencies in your service territory meet that in different ways. So I think there's some flexible options for public power utilities to work with. Monty mentioned a little bit about the duck curve. Huge reliability challenges, specifically with what we call the net peak in August and September. That's the evening ramp that Monty mentioned. The state invested close to $3 billion, maybe more than $3 billion in basically buying out of market energy that will only be on standby during August and September. They also established a new process, and this will be applicable to Alameda Municipal, to AMP, and we'll be working with NCPA and the CEC on this to establish what's a new planning reserve margin for you. So that's that new reserve power that you have to have. Typically, it's been about 15% of what your load is. The CEC will be working with the municipal community to revise that and ultimately provide recommendations to you as the board. So the CEC is not going to tell you what you have to do, but they're going to recommend to you, and then the law requires you to basically act on those recommendations. That process is supposed to conclude by the end of this year. That process has not started. We've been in touch with the CEC at the highest level. They just have a lot of work to do. We don't expect them to meet that date, but we are prepared to work with them as an association and working with NCPA to engage on your behalf. There's also a new optional state energy permitting program. Not sure how many projects you may be looking at in the pipeline, either individually or through NCPA, but the state did establish a new one-stop shop where you can actually now go to the CEC, and instead of going through the local permitting process, you can actually go through a state process. So the local agencies weren't happy about that, but the idea is to streamline and overcome some of the NIMBYism that we hear about for housing. Well, that NIMBYism also applies to energy projects, and the idea is if we can have it permitted at the state level, that might help overcome some of those objections. And by the way, overall in the state, we have to triple the size and amount of generation on the grid. Right now, I think the state's building about 2.5 gigawatts a year. We need to be building 4 to 6. Record-breaking procurement has to be taking place. Saw some new chargers out there. That's a big focus for, and I got this shot, must be the old ones from online. I do have to say, I like those ones, the color of those a little bit better.
Those ones are going to be wrapped.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Cool.
Yeah.
So one piece of legislation that is really relevant to that passed last year that will require Nico and his staff to start considering actually what the first presenter from the city talked about is there's all these planning documents out there about housing and EV chargers. Utilities, you need to be looking at that and kind of anticipating what your load growth is going to be from that new development. So that's the AB 2700 law. We have some information we've been providing to our members on that as well. It doesn't really require you to act on it, but just requires you to consider it in your planning process. So I think that give and take with the city, but also with other entities around the state, and also with the Energy Commission, they'll be providing some data as well about EV deployment in your area. The governor was really successful in passing a pretty major climate package, SB 1020 on one of the previous slides that set those stepping stones to 100% clean energy was part of that. Another major pillar of this climate package at the end of the year was AB 1279. The state now has an official law that says economy-wide by 2045, got to be carbon neutral. So that's going to have some impact on the electric industry, on AMP in some way. The Air Resources Board will be implementing that law. We're already starting to see them act on that essentially by doing things like phasing out the sale of gas-powered cars, which will ultimately impact load growth and things of that nature as well. Also, as part of that, I mentioned Monty facilitating carbon capture and green hydrogen to see if there are ways we can do dispatchable clean energy to meet those evening ramps. And then finally, as part of that package, I don't think this has any direct bearing on AMP, but it is kind of a grid asset. The state did extend the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant by 5 years. PG&E still has to apply to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think they're in the process of doing that, but that was a major legislative discussion at the end of the session. A few other things, and I'll turn to this year. Phase out of Mylar balloons. I don't know if that's a huge problem in AMP service territory. Balloons will not be banned, but we did work with Assemblymember Quirk when he was still in office to actually phase in a new technology. It'll phase in over about 4 years, and it actually looks like Mylar, but when it touches a power line, it doesn't arc. So there's kind of an RPS of sorts for actually balloon sales that they have to start increasing the volume of non-conductive Mylar balloons at a date in the future. This does not apply to AMP, but I do think it's something to be aware of because it is an indicator for the future. The 16 largest municipal utilities in the state now have to, starting in the next year or so, have to provide hourly reporting to the Energy Commission on their loads and hourly greenhouse gases. They're starting with the bigger utilities, but this could be something that is ultimately extended to smaller utilities. This is part of the movement, not only to have 100% clean energy on a yearly basis, but on an hourly basis, around the clock, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. One last thing, transmission is a very hot topic in Sacramento. The ISO has predicted that they need to build about $30 billion worth of new transmission. Monty also mentioned the transmission access charge. Our estimates show that's going to go up on customer bills in Northern California from about, I want to say, it's maybe like $20 to $24 a month that your customers pay on that. And by 2040, it's probably maybe closer to $49-ish a month. So it'll make up a bigger portion of the bill. Legislators, regulators are very interested in seeing transmission built, though, because they see it as the key to unlocking all these new renewable carbon resources that need to be built. Definite balancing act. Busy year. 2023, what's happening this year? CMA actually is working on a couple bills. One related to an advanced clean fleets regulation at the Air Resources Board. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the regulatory slide, which is next. Basically, we want to make sure that you have laws and regulations in place that support transition to zero emission utility vehicles, but also support your ability to provide emergency response capabilities and mutual aid assistance around the clock, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So our legislation is really aimed at finding that balance. We have another piece of legislation that's aimed at really solving a workforce gap. We've heard this from all our members. Everyone's having trouble not only finding the linemen jobs, but also the middle management jobs, the resource planners, the electricians. So we have a bill out there that's trying to connect community college students and high school students with high road careers is what we call them. The governor has a major energy proposal, about a 40-page bill this year that essentially set up a new central procurement authority, would also potentially expose utilities, including AMP and their customers, to a new capacity payment if the grid is short in certain conditions. And then two other things I want to mention, AB 538 is a major governance reform proposal of the ISO board. We recently hosted a meeting and Nico attended on behalf of AMP and NCPA with the ISO CEO to talk about this. But the idea is right now the ISO board is appointed by the governor to share resources more broadly around the West so that we can help meet our climate goals. They want to remove that governance and create an independent model that is not subject to California policy. politics. Major piece of debate up in Sacramento this year. And then finally, again, back to the EV chargers, we're working on a bill by Senator Gabriel that would establish a 125-day average energization timeline for public EV chargers. So it's not a shot clock, but he's really trying to push utilities that you have to try and achieve average energization timelines. We're working with them to provide some local control and flexibility in meeting those types of requirements. I'll wrap up real quickly. Advanced Clean Fleets rule. This is a really major piece, really major regulation that actually was just adopted at the end of April by the Air Resources Board. Starting in 2024, if you buy new medium or heavy duty vehicles, they have to, 50% of them have to be zero emission. That can either be hydrogen or plug-in battery. Starting in 2027, 100% of your vehicle purchases have to be that. There are some accommodations in that regulation. We worked really hard with the Air Resources Board on some of those accommodations and flexibility. The main one being a comparison test so that you can say, here's what our typical trucks do on a daily basis. Does a zero emission configuration meet those same needs? We'll be producing a lot more information for our members about what that regulation means. Be looking into natural gas prices at the Public Utilities Commission. I don't know if this has hit your books and your customer rates yet, but this has been a big issue for a number of our members. We don't know what will come of this, but we are a party to this proceeding. We expect this will get really deep into the weeds about why those natural gas prices were so high for so long in December. Again, already talked about transmission. ISO approved $9.3 billion worth of new transmission this year. And then already mentioned the CEC planning reserve margin process, and that is supposed to again be done by this year, but I don't think they will meet that date. So that wraps it up. Very busy in Sacramento. Happy to answer any questions should you have any.
Any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from the board? Patrick, could you back up 2 slides? Could you explain that last item? How fast can you connect? What's that mean?
Yeah. So there's a process at the Public Utilities Commission, and I don't know how it was initiated, but there's what's called an interim decision that basically directs investor and utilities to try and achieve an average energization service timeline, and that includes local permitting. So basically, ChargePoint or someone says, I want to build 4 chargers here. You now have to try and approve everything and get it basically built and online with 125 days. And if you don't meet that deadline, you have to report why you didn't meet that and what factors led to you not meeting that. There's a legislator who's taken that interim decision and put it in a bill and said, well, we want the municipal utilities to meet this as well. And the idea is the Air Resources Board has banned the sale of gas cars by 2035. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation is going to require every fleet in the state to transition to zero emission vehicles. We got to have a lot of chargers out there. And so the idea is they want to put pedal to the metal and make sure that people have access to the EV chargers in public spaces.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and coming down from Sacramento and making the presentation. Very informative.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'm Barry Moldine. I'm with the California Municipal Utilities Association, and Patrick and I are colleagues. And he's going to put up my presentation.
It should be.
Yeah. Hey, one. Did you combine them?
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. And where NCPA talked about the, sort of like the resources that you have on the ground, and Patrick talked about legislature last year and what the plans are, or at least what we're debating this year. I'm going to talk about the future. Well, move to the future. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in our world from more of a 50,000 foot level. I do want to thank you all for inviting us. It's a great opportunity just to have this conversation and expand our brains a little bit, understand what's going on. Nico's also on the CMUA Executive Committee. He's been on our board for several years, but also on our Executive Committee, so we appreciate his leadership. So this is not the end of the presentation, but I do want to make it clear that we're not really on the right track right now. There's a lot of confusion about the future of our energy resources and what's the best way forward. And we have to plot along and figure that out. And that's what we're all trying to do together. We don't really know what the best options are. Most important is we have to figure out what's best for you in your community. So there's no question that climate change is happening. We're seeing a green revolution. We can't stop policymakers. We don't want to necessarily stop policymakers from passing green laws and regulations, but we are seeing problems that are slowing down the implementation of this revolution. And they include things like a supply chain slowdown. There's a lot of RFPs to install new stuff, new solar and wind resources, and there's just not enough supply for that around the world. We're also seeing this overemphasis on one particular strategy, solar, wind, batteries, and transmission. And we are proponents of a wider strategy, what I call an all-of-the-above strategy. And then lastly, we're starting to see impacts on reliability and affordability. Prices are going up faster than we like, and we've seen questionable reliability in the broad electric system. And getting to success means that we have to share. We have to share the good, the bad, the pros, the cons, what works and what doesn't. And good news is that you're part of NCPA, you're part of CNUA, you're part of the American Public Power Association. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. And that is a good thing. That's a great way to say, we want to do this. Who else has done that? Let's try to learn from them. I mean, if you want to do something that's a serial number 001, that's okay too. Nevertheless, a lot of people are going to be looking to you to say, what was your experience? The second way that we're going to achieve success is through this all-the-above strategy. Solar, wind, batteries. Patrick talked about we need to install, develop a lot more gigawatts of energy throughout the state. A lot of that focus, a lot of that talk is about solar and wind, and we can do we can implement other technologies like Monty talked about, hydrogen and expanding hydropower. CCS is carbon capture and storage. We can't build new nuclear plants in California, but we can accept nuclear electrons. He talked about geothermal. So all these options are before us, including energy efficiency, that we need to tap into. And finally, reliability and affordability. As a power supplier, you need to make sure that you're holding on to all of your capacity until you have replacements that may be zero carbon, but you can turn them on and off when needed. So California is important because policymakers believe in this state that we can lead the world. And we know that there's a lot of climate thought leaders in the state. There's a lot of people coming up with new ideas on how to address climate. We spend our own money on climate change. The state spends money. You are spending your money. And interestingly, California is one of 38 what we call trifecta states, and that is where the governor and the legislature are all the same political party. And because of that, there's not a strong check and balance. There's one direction from one party effectively, and it's just full steam ahead. And again, that works on both sides of the spectrum, depending on whatever state you're in. Nevertheless, California is one of those states. So we're moving forward with the strategy that the state wants. And it feels sometimes like it's overwhelming. This is a clip from I Love Lucy, where they had to get all of the bonbons in there. But whatever. So last week, Gavin Newsom said, the future happens here first. And California is once again showing the world what real climate action looks like. And he said that in response to the Advanced Clean Fleets rule, which we know is flawed. As Patrick described, we have to start buying electric trucks next year and in 2027, they don't exist today. They don't, especially in environments where we depend on electricity to fuel our trucks when there's a power outage. So there's not enough hydrogen vehicles for that either. Nevertheless, the Air Resources Board went forward with that, saying, well, we want to show this policy to the world. We'll worry about the implementation later, and then it's going to be up to us to test the market. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And then we have to give that feedback loop back to the Air Resources Board and back to the legislature. And we're going to try. There's no question. And we hope that the automakers will deliver these vehicles. It's unlikely that they can in the time frame that we need them, but nevertheless, we're going to try, and that'll be part of our joint experience. So we'll probably be delaying at some point in the future, but we'll be doing that together as all utilities. And when those vehicles are ready, we'll be buying them. So as Patrick described, our big goal, 60% renewable energy by 2030, and then 100% clean energy by 2045, and then those steps in between. So we've got some aggressive goals in the state. And the bottom line is, from where we are at 34% renewables today, that is, that slide there shows hydropower, renewables, and nuclear. But renewables of that bar, that the 34% of, that's just renewables. We have actually a 50% clean energy today, but we got to get up to 60% in 6.5 years. And we are testing the market. We're issuing RFPs, and we're not getting a lot of response. So it's not easy. We hope that power suppliers will come in and be able to get us that clean energy. We're doing what we can to build, but we rely on purchase power agreements for a lot of that energy. And we've got problems with reliability. And the bottom line here is, well, we had rolling outages in August of 2020, but in August and September every year for the next few years, we are short. We're short of power. We have a 55,000 megawatt peak, but we know that we're 1.6 to 6% short, because what happens in August and September is that it stays hot, but the sun goes down earlier in the evening, so we don't have as much solar. And we are building new natural gas plants. Patrick alluded to this as well. We're keeping the nuclear power plant running, Diablo Canyon, and those power plants, there are certain power plants that were slated to close, like the one in the middle, because they're close to populations. They're called once-through cooling plants. They're warming the ocean effectively. The state is now paying for small facilities to be built and operate all around the state. They can fit into a footprint of a substation. So there are opportunities to build these reliability machines everywhere. And they're spending big money, $5.2 billion, and they have a big goal, 5,000 megawatts, which is about 10% of the state's total goal. That's happening as we speak. And if you're interested in building some of these smaller engines that can provide local reliability, there's opportunities to do that. They call, we're also trying to access BUDs, backup generators, and the state has a program called the Demand Side Grid Support Program. So that's what this is, building these generators. Monty showed a couple of slides that describe what happened on Labor Day, or around Labor Day. This is September 6th. This is a chart that shows 0 to 24, so midnight to midnight, effectively. Midnight on the left side to midnight on the right side. What happened that day when we came very close to the lights going out. And what happened was, we had, there's along the bottom, you see a line going up and down. That's batteries. Batteries came along and provided 2,000 megawatts that day, which was at the peak, which was around 5:45, which was great. But we have 4,000 megawatts of batteries in the state, but only 2,000 showed up. And that's just because batteries discharge on and off throughout the day, so only 2,000 were available to us. We had hydropower from the Northwest that came in. That was 9,000 megawatts. And we appreciate that, that influx of power. And as Monty said, 26,000 megawatts was natural gas. So more than half of our needs that day. And again, his point was, let's hold on to our capacity before and not shut it off until we have clean replacements. That point there. And there are reliability problems all across the country. The National Electric Reliability Council says that there's multiple regions where we're very close to the edge. There have been outages in the Midwest. The wind stopped blowing, and there were outages for several days. I mean, on and off for several days. Winter Storm Elliott in Tennessee Valley last Christmas also created rolling outages. So these problems are occurring in a variety of places. This was what Patrick was talking about, that chart that said $21 to $57 is transmission. Now, don't try to read that chart. Just notice that they're going up. Both of them are going up. And this is the cost of transmission as planned by the California Independent System Operator. So transmission costs are going up as well. And it takes a lot of time to build transmission. So it's not just to snap your fingers and it's going to get built. The costs are going up and it takes time to build them. And while we say we're relying on transmission a lot, you know, it's hard to build transmission. And this chart basically says our prices have gone up 3 times faster than the rest of the country. So in California, the prices that you're seeing, the price stresses that you're seeing, they are legitimate and they're higher than elsewhere. All the above strategy, that's what we're fighting for. We need, as NCPA talked about, hydrogen. We need geothermal. Yes, we need solar and wind. We need efficiency. We need maybe small modular reactors, or we can't build them in the state at least accept those electrons that come in. We need batteries, but we need to keep our minds open for everything. Now, this picture here of Jerry Brown is not like a caricature that I found. This is his actual governor's portrait. So that's in the Capitol. But Jerry Brown said this quote. He said, so if maybe you try to move slower, you end up moving faster. What is it about the tortoise and the hare? The idea is that to achieve the goal, the fastest way to do that is doing it in a manner that continues uninterrupted. And to do that, you have to avoid backlash. So what he's talking about is having an all the above strategy, keeping the lights on. So we need to be deliberate. We need to be methodical, look for opportunities to make sure that we're keeping the lights on and moving forward. Also, Monty talked about the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money out there, and we need to be looking at that to access that money. I want to talk about electric vehicles for a little bit, and I know that you all are interested in electric vehicles and promoting electric vehicles and bikes. This is an expectation for the electric vehicle sales in the world. Today, we're at about 4 million, but the expectation by 2040 is to be up to 56 million. Anyway, 4 million to 56 million. And the growth rate, just again, across the world is going to be pretty steep. Today, across the country, we have 160,000 charging ports. 2 of them are outside. We're expected to go to 1.2 million public charging ports by 2030. So again, just in 6.5 years, we need a lot of charging ports. And 28 million will be private in people's homes. All of this is good to address range anxiety, which is a problem for electric vehicles, but we're doing a decent job of building those. The point is, we need to build more. And people want EVs. 25% of Americans say their next car is going to be an EV, but that's going to grow over time. Millennials really like them. Ford and GM are investing $400 billion to have an all EV fleet, and the sales around the world, just in the US, they're 7%, but the rest of the world are 14%. And 25% of Chinese cars are electric vehicles. So they're growing everywhere else. But we know there's problems. There's problems in our homes. A water heater will pull 4.5 kilowatts and a heat pump 5 kilowatts. if we put a level 2 charger in there, it's going to draw a lot of electricity. So we have to be able to manage that electricity and adjust our rates so that people are charging at the right times of day. We can't have people charging when there's a peak. We have to move that. We have to incent them to charge at other times of the day. So charging at home is a challenge. And I'm not sure that we can handle all the cars in the US, at least today. 280 million cars with all that additional drop is going to be hard. Obviously, as Patrick said, we need to build a lot more power supply to do that, to have everything relying on electricity. And the zero emission vehicles are also going to apply to trucks. And we're trying to bring some common sense to that in the legislature, even though the rule just passed, so that there's exemptions for utility vehicles and particularly related to mutual aid emergencies. Who would have thought that 5 years ago we'd have this expansion of electric bicycles? And they're growing tremendously from a $20 billion business today to a $40 billion business by 2040. Recognize too that there's a lot more accidents on e-bikes. They're the highest of all forms of transportation. 115 per million riders, there are accidents. Now, they're not serious accidents, but there are accidents compared to regular bicycles of just 15 accidents per million. So a lot more accidents on e-bikes. Why? Because suddenly people who are used to riding their bike at 15 miles an hour are going 35 miles an hour, and they're not necessarily stopping at stop signs, which is what bicycles do. But we're also going to see in the future things like this, electric minis, which are closed off and are good in the rain, and they tilt with a gyroscope. And we're going to see autonomous electric trucking. We're trying to build chargers on I-5 to do that. They're good on the highway. They're not as good in the city. So the concept, at least at the moment, is that there's a driver that connects to the truck when they get to town. And retailers are installing chargers, which is a great thing because they want people to come to Walmart and to Pilot and to grocery stores and so on. So we're going to see a lot of new chargers at those retail outlets as well. The bottom line on EVs is that there's some pros and cons. There's no question. They are happening. They're impossible to ignore. They're a growth opportunity for us. I mean, you know this already. It's happening in front of us. And the most important thing is to do the best you can to monitor what's going on in Vita so that you can serve that load. In the future, yeah, we're going to see flying taxis. They won't exactly look like that, but they will look like this. And the market, interestingly, is like the first market that's been talked about is from Manhattan out to JFK Airport. You can save about an hour by flying taxi. Joby is a company in Silicon Valley that is building them. They haven't put people in them yet, but they fly these autonomously, which is kind of amazing. Another option is, from the East Bay over to SFO. You're going to have this, autonomous taxis. People will save an hour to be able to get over there. So who here will fly in an autonomous taxi? Anybody? Nobody?
There's one, mind you.
Oh, then you will? Okay, awesome. I'm going to shake your head. Yeah, but they're coming. And those full-size helicopter planes exist today. There's a lot of money that is waiting to invest in all these technologies, and this is where venture capitalists are investing. I'm not going to read them, but there's a lot of interesting concepts in there. Electric airplanes, autonomous farming. I'm not sure what that is. Well, I guess that's machines that move through farms, and there's a fair amount of that going on today. So there's a lot of money flowing into the clean energy space. So what do we do next? Well, it's a little confusing, but there are a couple things that we can do. One is, we've talked about this all the above. We have to keep our minds open, and we have to talk about that with our community. And we have to do things that make sense locally and be open to new ideas and pilot projects. If there's an idea out there and we can see if it might work, let's try it. Now, it is difficult to build things. There's no question. We have NIMBY, not in my backyard, and then there's Banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. However, this is the cover of Mother Jones magazine from this month, and Bill McKibben wrote yes in our backyards. And to start to have a conversation with the environmental community about being open to building and tackling climate change. We did a survey to find out what customers are asking us about, what they want us to do. And the first thing they want us to do is keep the lights on. They want to control costs. There's no question about that. They can accept some costs, but they still want us to pay close attention to it. They want us to connect with them and share with them what's going on, give them information. And they also want us to fight for something. It could be anything, whatever it is that they want, whatever's on their minds. If it's climate change, get out there and fight for climate change. If reliability is important, fight for that. But bottom line is they want us to fight for something. And they want us to care for their community, to help low-income customers, to educate them, educate all customers on what makes sense going forward. So action items, let's stay on top of electric vehicle development. We have to understand this variable renewables, the stuff that's on and off, because having an oversupply of renewable energy does not equal reliability. We have to have stuff. We need to work with our associations, and you're already doing a great job with that. And ultimately, keep talking about reliability and affordability. You've heard me say that probably a dozen times because I've wanted to, because that is what we have to do as an electric utility. And John Kennedy said, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. So our goal, our job is to keep the lights on, control costs, get some clean dispatchable power, and then bottom line is serve our communities, because that's what we do as public power utilities. So that concludes my talk. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Barry. That was really thought-provoking and a lot of information. Do you have any questions? Comments? All right.
One quick question, just honestly more for, kind of get this in there, but the 55,000 megawatt, that's just Cal ISO, right? That's not all of California. What is?
No, that's all. That's everybody.
That's all, that's LADWP.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's just, well, hold on.
Just-
That's just CAISO. That's CAISO.
So
Yeah.
we're actually, as a state, we're significantly more. So there's more projects, there's more everything. And as we try to balance the reliability, affordability, yet the need for more,
Yes. Yeah.
it's even harder.
It's probably
than-
closer to
64,000.
64,000 megawatts. Did you say 70?
Yeah, it was just, you
Yeah.
had 55, and I think between Bank and
LA.
LA and
It's
a
closer to
couple
70.
other ones,
Yeah,
and I think it was closer to 70.
got it. And when we have these issues, Sacramento, Bank, LA,
Right.
they have excess capacity because they're vertically integrated. They generally generate into the CAISO during these events. So yeah, we do have more power supply.
And thank you though. Thank you very much for all this.
And thanks for that clarification.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
All right.
All right. All right, I'm going to take us to the finish line here this evening. These are all very excellent presentations, and we appreciate Barry making the trip and everybody else. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the background for our strategic plan, get into a deeper dive on our KPIs, talk a little bit about some of the future challenges, and we heard kind of the big picture on some of those, and there is some overlap, and then there's some Alameda specific items as well, which we'll get into. Next steps, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. I'd like to start off with this slide. I think several board members are familiar with this. They've seen this before. The process that we went through 4 years ago. We had an extensive external stakeholder group, and we actually did the math and worked out to about 100 personnel. These were individuals. We want to get a cross section of different individuals from more of an environmental perspective, large customers, small customers. We actually have one member here this evening who participated 4 years ago. So I think it was good to get everyone in the room and talking about the different issues and hear from each other. The internal focus group was it was actually 25 employees, and it was a cross-section from the organization. So we wanted representation from all groups. So it wasn't just supervisors and managers. It also included employees really throughout the whole organization. The core planning team, that was essentially the executive management team who drive the development, oversee the process. And then finally, the PUB, there were 3 meetings during plan development, scoping, draft, and final. So we want to make sure we're doing check-ins with the board, getting feedback on progress. So the board approved the plan in January 2019. Really, the purpose of the strategic plan is we want to define where we want to be in 10 years. So that's what we call the strategic destination. It used to be the vision, now it's called the strategic destination. 5 issues and supporting strategies and tactics really chart the path to achieve the strategic destination. And then plan reporting, we do a deep dive every 6 months. Typically that will go on the consent agenda where we get into a lot of the details. This evening, we're really focused on the high level, on the key performance indicators, and checking in to make sure that we're on track for it. So here's the strategic plan. Now our mission, starting on the left, to manage and safely provide reliable, cost-effective, sustainable, and environmentally friendly electric services for sustainable Alameda. There's a lot of sustainables in there. That hasn't really changed in the last 5-10 years. What really I think is the more important focus is on the strategic destination. So advancing our tradition of community ownership and sustainability to power the needs of the 21st century Alameda. So we wanted to link our past. We are the oldest municipal utility west of the Mississippi. I want to make sure we have that link to the past, that rich history, but then also forward-looking. Where are we going to be in those 10 years? And what are how are things changing and what are our customers expecting? So in terms of, and tonight we're going to talk about the issues. The 6 months check-in is the strategy and the tactics where we do that deeper dive. So for the key performance indicators, these were developed to monitor, track, and communicate progress. We have 11 KPIs across the 5 issue areas, and really it's just a very straightforward and quick way to assess progress. These are the KPIs, the issue areas with KPIs embedded in each. I'm not going to talk about each of these because I'm about to go into a little bit more detail on each of these and then kind of sum it up, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about future issues and other challenges. On issue number 1, sustainability. So we must manage our triple bottom line performance to support a sustainable Alameda. So number 1 is achieve our 100% carbon neutral energy portfolio by 2020. We've achieved that and we've maintained that. So we're meeting that target. And it also adds in there while being able to maintain competitive position. At the time, the board was very committed to the 100% carbon free, but also wanted to make sure that there was checks and balances on cost. AMP is in the top 3 of second one, AMP is in the top 3 of similar sized public utilities in California for percent of customers receiving EV and energy efficiency incentives. So it's mixed results. On the EV front, you can see it jumping down a little bit. We're actually number 1 in terms of EV charger rebates compared to the other similar sized utilities. Energy efficiency on the commercial side, it's a good story. We're 2nd out of 7. On the residential side, which has been really a challenge since I've been here, this is not unusual in terms of electric utilities, but we did increase from 6th to 5th out of those other utilities, but certainly room for improvement. Building electrification is taking on a much larger role. We talked a little bit about that previously in some of the other speakers, and more alignment with the climate action plan. So issue number 2 on customer experience. So we want to increase our value to the community through meaningful programs and services, positive customer interactions, and building and reinforcing. These 2 are really focused on, prior to COVID, we would do commercial and residential surveys. We would alternate. You can see on the chart to the right, 2017, 2018, 2019. So we kind of go back and forth, and we included some of the numbers there. Unfortunately, once COVID hit, we actually suspended all of the surveys. There's really no point in asking people how they feel when they're cooped up at home or their business is shut down. So that didn't move forward for a couple of years. We did complete a commercial survey, and that will be coming to the board next week, actually, as part of the regular meeting. So we do have some recent data to share with the board. So we have a commercial baseline reestablished in 2023, and then residential will be in 2023. Under business resiliency, so we must maintain our competitiveness and financial performance by utilizing our sustainable resources and through operational excellence. Number one, we want to put our assets, document our assets and put them into an asset management inventory. So that's underway. We did select the tool, and the implementation is scheduled for summer 2020. Number two, this is an excellent story for us. Maintain rates 15% below PG&E and 10% below local CCAs. We're actually exceeding that target. We continue to put space between us and both the IOUs and PG&E in particular, and the CCAs as well. So some excellent news there. And then number three, document and streamline 100% of critical processes by 2021. That's ongoing, and I'm going to show a summary, kind of a comparison of prior years here in a couple of slides. There's been some improvement here. We're up to 75%. I'm still working on that. Moving in the right direction. Under technology, so we have to optimize our technology to meet our evolving business environment. So technology is a big focus for us. We've done a reorg. We've elevated our IT group. We now have a Chief Utility Technology Officer position, a kudo. So, which will be, we're in the process of filling that right now. And that just acknowledges just the focus that we have on technology. We have our smart meters, everything that we do now. We used to do a lot of things through paper. We're now moving away. So increase the number of customers accessing our portal. So we did have a portal a couple of years ago. We were meeting this metric. We did launch a new portal simply because we were having a lot of challenges with the older portal. And so now we're rebaselining due to the new portal. I will say that we are getting some great uptake from customers, some good data and some good results there. 75% of those accounts are currently enrolled in payrolls. Number two, effectively train 100% of staff in applicable technologies for their position by 2020. Again, there were some impacts related to COVID, but right now it's complete. And so we're really doing a lot of continuous refreshers as we move along. And there's a couple of bullets there that deal with cybersecurity, and we continue to train staff on phishing emails on a weekly basis. And our results are very good. We've actually started using artificial intelligence, and we did see some impacts associated with that, but it's a constant thing, and you have to stay on top of it. Commissioner Serventi and President Serventi and Commissioner McKenna and I were just back in DC, and we heard a lot about cyber issues and just the challenges associated with that. Under workforce, so again, a very important area. So we have to attract and retain employees while fostering a collaborative culture and adapting to changing industry trends. This isn't something that's necessarily unique to us. We heard a speaker earlier talk about vacancies, retirements, challenges in certain positions, in particular your operations staff. So number one here is improve employee satisfaction survey, top 2 scores by 5% year over year. That's underway. Unfortunately, the last one we did was in 2017, and that was we did have plans to do it, and then COVID hit, and again that impacted our schedule on this. We are working to complete the survey by summer 2023. Number two, we want to increase the number of qualified applicants for critical open positions by 25% by 2020. And we've been meeting this target for several years now. And we changed the way we do things, some of our processes. In particular, mentioning the fact that we have a 4-day work week, which is very popular with people. And right now, we do have some challenges, but we're seeing manageable turnover. Not a whole lot movement in critical positions, but I'll note in the couple of slides in the future here, it's like there's certainly some concerns in some of those areas. So this is a little difficult to see, but every year I like to give a summary of and compare to the prior years. And so you can see 2019, 2020, 2021, and on the left side, that's everything I just went over, and frequency of review. And then 2022 is we're talking about that now. And really what I tried to highlight in red there so that you can see what has changed. And you can see under customer experience, that's the commercial surveys. So we've got a baseline's been reestablished. Certainly if you look at prior years, we canceled because of COVID. So we're moving in the right direction there. Residential will be next year, so we'll re-baseline there as well. Under business resiliency, we see some positive things underway. Implementation summer 2023, that's the asset management plan. You see that it was delayed due to COVID. And then ongoing on the document and streamline 100% of critical processes. That's some improvement there. There was some impacts, as I mentioned earlier, with COVID. And then in technology, on the portal side, we're rebaselining because of the switch to the new portal. We're seeing some great uptake and some great results there, so no real concerns. And then training of staff, an improvement there, again, kind of moving in the right direction, that we've completed that. And so we're just kind of doing the ongoing refreshers. Under workforce, we're moving forward with the survey, as I mentioned. So again, some going in the right direction on most, if not all of these. So the key takeaways, from our perspective, we are largely on track. Areas that were impacted and delayed by COVID, we are getting back on track in those areas as well. We don't really see a need for major adjustments, and this is based on the presentation tonight, but it's also based on mid-year assessment where we do that deeper dive. I think we're staying on top of most, if not all, of the different areas. The reorg, as I mentioned earlier, is the final piece of the puzzle. And I really just want to acknowledge staff. I mean, really during the COVID times, and this, you've got that ended, and then we move into a period of inflation and it's been a stressful time the last 3 or 4 years. Staff has done a great job really stepping up and keeping the lights on. We talked about reliability, and then also keeping those rate increases as low as possible as well. So future challenges through 2030. So physical and cyber, and I moved this year to the top. Threats are evolving rapidly in complexity and sophistication. And on the physical side, we are actually experiencing much more of what we call physical intrusions on our assets. So we are seeing people attempting to break into our facilities, whether that be the substations or the other infrastructure. Mostly they're interested in copper, but there's always the possibility of something nefarious. Clean energy. So we have struggled in the past couple of years maintaining 100% clean energy. Really not a problem for 2023 because the hydro year has just been exceptional. So that's kind of bailing us out now. So for the next year, at least, we don't see a real challenge there. Resiliency. In the past, we've talked about public safety power shutoffs, PSPS, natural disasters. I think the incident that happened in December, the storms in December, January, and February reminded us that it's not only those areas, the PSPS and the natural disasters, it's also these storms that really had a big impact. And PG&E and some of our fellow municipal utilities really struggled during this time. It was not uncommon to hear stories of people being out of power for 3, 4, 5 days. We actually did remarkably well, and I think this is really a testament to the work that we've done on maintaining our system and really the work that staff's done, and also the focus on technology, which is one of the other pillars of the strategic plan. We used to do a lot of things by paper. Now the field personnel have tablets, they go out. GIS, we're really using that a lot. The asset management plan will then interface with the GIS system and really take us to that next level. But it's already paying dividends. In terms of infrastructure, we do have some significant work coming on the pipeline in Carver and Jenny substations. So some of the assets in there are reaching the end of their useful life. And so a lot of conversations going to happen in the future about what to do about those, the timeline, and how to pay for those. Barry talked about affordability. So cost pressures continue to be challenging. We've been fortunate, I think, over the last 4 years, we didn't do any rate increases during COVID. Last year, we did a 5%. This year, we're projecting, we're approved 7% for the next fiscal year. And that, I know that gave people a lot of heartburn, but when we talk to our fellow municipal utilities and you look at PG&E, there's a lot of entities that are making double-digit rate increases. And, we refer to it as the perfect storm. Our budget is the perfect storm. Costs are going up, inflationary, transformers, power costs. You heard from Monty about all the different things, the FERC relicensing, the K's clean out, all these big ticket items that are coming down the pipeline. At the end of the day, those flow into rates, and then our customers have to pay those. And we'll see next week, we'll do our commercial survey and we'll see the results there. And I think affordability is one of the areas of concern that we did hear from those customers. Electrification, I think transportation electrification is going well. Our TOU rate is very popular. People continue to sign up for that. But now we're really kind of expanding into building electrification. So we have some rebates, we've got some new programs we're working on because we know that's an important part of this strategic plan, but also the climate action plan. We heard from Andrew earlier today talking about all these new buildings coming in are going to be all electric, and I think there's some things being worked on about converting existing buildings as well. And then last but not least, staff retirements, maturing workforce. I think we've done a pretty good job managing that, and I think the reorg, one of the goals of the reorg was to make some changes in certain areas to allow for succession planning. So we have these 2 new supervisor positions, and we've got individuals in there because that's been a small organization. Sometimes that presents challenges. We've lost people to larger organizations where there's more opportunities. So in terms of next steps, we'll do the mid-year strategic plan progress report, maybe late summer, sometime in September. And that again gets into a lot more of the details. Continue on the current trajectory, and then just want to highlight a couple of strategic plan elements that may come to the board in the very near future. The Doolittle Solar Project, which you're very familiar with and we've been working on for many years now, may come back to life. So we are having conversations about that. Multifamily EV charging, that's coming. It says June, I think that's now July. So that's something that we're very excited about to try and really get charging in that sector, multifamily, and also low-income areas as well. With that, I will close my presentation and we will open it up to questions or comments.
Questions, comments from the board?
Sure, I have some. Is the public after us or?
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and ask some questions and then we'll do it
Okay.
afterwards.
I mostly just have comments. So one, I just want to say on the resiliency and the reliability, I just want to thank AMP staff. They've done an amazing job and just really kind of compared to our surrounding areas, it's just been great. And just through the storms, all of our city departments, but AMP was one of the key departments that really kept us safe. So I just want to say thank you to General Manager Prokos and all of this. Just a couple other comments. One is on sustainability, just to let the board and the community know that in the budget for the city, there is a CARB update that is in the budget for next year. So that'll be commencing, and I think the city staff looks forward to working with AMP's staff and PB on that update. On the employee survey, I'm really supportive of this. I think it's a great thing to do. We're going to be looking at how we might start doing that citywide too. Not in my first year, but maybe next year we'll start looking at that. So I just commend you for doing that. And would love to see kind of a follow-up on that. I also just noticed, and I think it's fine that the KPI is the top 2 scores and increasing those 5%, but it would be just as part of that follow-up, obviously looking at some of the other scores that may not be the top ones, but just kind of keeping track of those and how we can keep improving. And so that'll be something we'll be looking at for the city too, and how we can keep kind of employee relations and making sure we're working with our employees. And then last, just want to echo what General Manager said about Doolittle. We did talk today even, and we'll be holding some meetings, but I'm committed to trying to move that project forward and see what we can do. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more from us soon about that. So trying to kickstart that again. And so stay tuned.
No, I just want to thank you for the presentation and information.
I would also say thank you for that, and kudos to staff and everyone for doing such a great job this winter. We certainly did hear some amazingly intense stories from some of the utilities around us about what they went through. And, you know, as a resident, it was lovely to have the lights on, and in this seat, it was lovely to have the lights on and everything. So it's a lot of hard work behind that. So thank you.
I'd like to echo that also. I think you need to pass that on to the whole group. That the commission is very grateful for the work that everybody put out to make sure that the lights stayed on and that the transition to the new portal seems to have gone pretty well. And that you're really working hard to make sure that the community engages with us and that they're satisfied. So thank you very much for the work. Appreciate that. Any comments or questions from the public? Anybody would like to talk?
Sure. Hi. Mr. President, members of the board and staff. I'm Ruth Nabby with Community Action for Sustainable Alameda. I too want to commend the board and the staff for the hard work of keeping a municipal utility up and running and so reliable and so affordable. So very much appreciate that. And I so much appreciate that AMP and the city are working in partnership to meet the city's sustainability goals. A couple of things that I wanted to mention just to build on what the city manager said with regards to the opportunity that we have before us. This coming year, we will be supporting the city in the update to the climate action plan, and PUB was a very essential component of that dialogue, and the AMP staff very fundamentally involved. And I think this is our opportunity to really knit together the goals and strategic goals of AMP and the strategic goals of the city because of AMP's leadership on 100% non-carbon power. Check off that goal for CARP, but other than transportation, and Andrew is here, he could have told you all the city's doing on transportation, but our buildings and our natural gas use in buildings is our next biggest chunk of what we emit as a city. And so I really feel as there's a really great partnership opportunity that we as CASA can support the PUB and AMP and the city in its goal in converting the city from its reliance on natural gas to 100% electric power over time, and to really have a plan for that, right? So what is that going to look like if whole neighborhoods are, shutting off, gas? How does that work for AMP? What do we need to do? What is that vision like? I totally appreciated the presentation for CMUA, but to me, it rang a little bit discordant for Alameda, this top down from the state, all these hard goals. You got bottom up goals too. Your community really supports your sustainability goals, really wants to see you achieve the mandates coming down from the state and be leadership in that. And then just one quick one, I couldn't help but notice about the opportunity with balloons. Laguna Beach and Manhattan Beach have banned all balloons, and banned all release of balloons. I think we could work with the city for a little, not too difficult heavy lift on the a balloon ban altogether in Alameda. We don't need those in our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Any other comments from the public? Okay, any other comments from the board? Okay, and I think we have another meeting this coming Monday, our normal main meeting will be at 6 o'clock on Monday. And with that, I will adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:55. Oops,
Very quick,
so
that
meeting's at City Hall.
just a reminder to everybody.
Thank you very much. That's a good reminder. Appreciate that. Now we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.